Welcome to Deep Psyche. Have you ever noticed how certain people command the space around them without saying a single word? They don't shout, they don't chase. They simply withdraw, quietly, deliberately, and somehow everything begins to shift. The atmosphere thickens. People grow uneasy. Questions arise. They begin to chase after what was once readily available. Now imagine if you did the same. Imagine choosing silence instead of reaction, stillness instead of explanation, distance instead of desperate presence. What would happen if you stopped being emotionally, physically, and psychologically available at every moment? That's where transformation begins. The moment you stop giving yourself away so easily, the dynamics around you change. People become unsettled, not because you become cruel, but because they can no longer control you through your reactions. You become a mirror. And in your silence, they're forced to face themselves. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves." And when you choose to become inaccessible, it's not just about protecting your peace, it's a revelation. Watch who becomes desperate, who grows irritated, who tries to provoke you just to feel something from you. Their reaction exposes more about them than it does about you. And more importantly, it shows you how deeply you've been unconsciously manipulated through your own predictability. You've been giving parts of yourself away, one emotional response at a time, in the name of keeping peace, being liked, staying connected. You say yes when you mean no. You show up even when you're tired. And slowly, silently, you begin to fade from your own life. And what's left at the end of the day? Exhaustion, frustration, a hollow ache that you can't quite explain. But I will tell you why. Because you are too available for people who don't even deserve a second of your silence. This video is not about turning your back on the world. It's about turning toward yourself. It's about learning what Carl Jung called individuation, the sacred, often painful, always liberating process of becoming whole, authentic, and truly yourself. This process begins the moment you understand that silence can be stronger than 1,000 arguments. That choosing to withdraw, when it comes from awareness, not from avoidance, is not an escape, but an act of power. There is something profoundly transformative in stepping back. Not out of fear, but out of clarity. So I ask you now, as if looking into your soul, how long will you let your emotions be dictated by the chaos of others? How long will you react automatically, like a puppet pulled by invisible strings, every time someone touches your unhealed wound? Perhaps it's time to cut those strings, to stop reacting, to become quiet, still, a mystery. When you stop being constantly available, everything changes. You were taught to be present, to respond quickly, to say yes even when every fiber of your being whispered no. Since childhood, you've been conditioned to believe that your value lies in how much of yourself you're willing to give. But here is a truth rarely spoken aloud. This excessive availability is not a virtue. It's a subtle, polished form of captivity. And as long as you continue to believe that your worth depends on being emotionally accessible, you will continue to be manipulated, depleted, and then forgotten the moment your usefulness fades. Being overly available makes you predictable. And everything predictable becomes a tool. People start to use you like an emotional emergency button. They push it when they need comfort, attention, or relief, then put you back on the shelf once they've had their fill. But you don't see this clearly because you're trapped in the illusion that being present for everyone means someone will eventually be present for you. But life doesn't work that way. Carl Jung spoke of the persona, the mask we wear to be accepted and loved. It is that very mask that keeps you overextending yourself, saying it's okay when you're unraveling inside. You respond to messages even when your body aches for rest. You explain yourself, justify your feelings, defend your choices, as if you owe the world your constant accessibility. But the more you place yourself at the center of other people's stages, the more invisible you become on your own. Always being available is a quiet form of self-betrayal. It disguises itself as kindness, but in truth, it's a fear-driven pursuit of approval. It's a way of avoiding rejection, of trying to control how others see you. But that control comes at a price, and the price is your peace. It's your energy being poured endlessly into people, situations, and performances that give little or nothing back. Your life force, precious, limited, sacred, is being spent as if it were infinite. But it's not. And when it runs low, no one else feels the cost but you. People who demand your constant availability don't truly want you. What they want is what you give them: validation, comfort, distraction, a sense of being seen or needed. But the moment you change, the moment you begin to set boundaries, to no longer react as expected, they start to pull away. They call you distant. They say you've changed. And they're right, but not in the way they think. You haven't become less. You've simply stopped being useful to their emotional convenience. And here lies the uncomfortable truth. The more available you are, the less value others assign to you. What is abundant becomes taken for granted. What is always there begins to fade into the background. Emotional overavailability turns into emotional invisibility. No one truly respects what they don't have to earn, and no one values what they believe will never leave. So ask yourself, who truly deserves your presence? Who deserves your time, your attention, your care? And more importantly, who deserves your absence? But before answering that, we need to look deeper. Why do we feel this compulsion to always be available? Why do we react so quickly, justify so often, give in so easily? The answer, Carl Jung would say, lies in our psychic energy. To Jung, the human psyche was not a machine reacting passively to the world. It was an energy system, constantly consuming and distributing the life force we call attention, emotion, intention. Every thought you follow, every emotion you indulge, every conflict you engage in, it all costs energy. The real question is, are you consciously choosing where that energy goes? Or are you letting the world decide for you? Because each time you react impulsively, you're giving away that energy. When you defend yourself against criticism that doesn't even matter. When you respond to provocations just to prove a point. When you try to please those who never truly see you, you are draining yourself. And slowly, piece by piece, your vitality fades. Not because you're weak, but because your energy is misdirected. Jung said, "That which you resist persists." The more you react, the more deeply entangled you become. And the more entangled you are, the more exhausted you feel. Exhaustion doesn't mean you're not strong. It means your strength is being spent in the wrong places. And when you live in a state of constant depletion, you become vulnerable. You open yourself up to being used, overlooked, manipulated. The painful irony is that the people who press you for your presence are often the ones who vanish the moment your usefulness fades. If you don't learn to guard your energy, others will use it, not for your growth, but for their comfort. Your attention, your care, your inner fire, these are not infinite. And when you finally run low, the world will not come to refill you. So ask again, who deserves your energy? And more than that, are you willing to stop pouring it into those who only love the version of you that always says yes? Manipulative, opportunistic, and emotionally needy people can sense when someone doesn't know how to guard their energy. They notice it in your constant availability, in your reactive nature, in your attempts to fix, soothe, and rescue everyone around you. And they use it. Carl Jung once said that a healthy psyche is one that knows how to keep energy within the system. That doesn't mean becoming closed off or selfish. It means learning to say no without guilt, to remain silent without feeling cowardly, and to observe before acting. True power does not lie in immediate reaction. It lies in conscious response, in choosing how and when to act. But that level of discernment only becomes possible when you begin to recognize your own impulses. How often have you lost sleep over a conversation that didn't go the way you wanted? How many nights have you spent replaying moments, crafting responses you never sent, analyzing someone else's behavior? That's energy slipping away. Energy you will never get back. You are feeding ghosts that should have long been buried, keeping alive dynamics that thrive only because you keep responding to them. Every rumination, every internal replay, every unspoken argument is a leak in your inner system. Psychic energy, as Jung saw it, is like a force field. When contained, it creates presence, a silent kind of power. You walk into a room and people feel something shift, even if you say nothing. But when that energy is misused or spread too thin, you become ungrounded. You lose your shape, your edges, your impact. And the world, unfortunately, does not honor those who dissolve easily into the demands of others. That's why the work begins with observing your own triggers. What makes you react without thinking? What pulls you out of your center? Those moments, small, often invisible, are the cracks where your energy escapes. And it's at those exact points that transformation must happen. Not to turn you cold or... Jung called this projection the psychological mechanism by which people externalize what they refuse to acknowledge in themselves. But there's another layer to it. While others are projecting onto you, you are unconsciously allowing yourself to become the screen. The more emotionally accessible you are, the more you invite these projections. You stop being you. You become a role. Think of that friend who only calls when they're in crisis. The partner who only shows affection when you're useful. The colleague who flatters you, but only when they need something. These people are not relating to your essence. They are relating to the function you serve in their script. And the painful part is, you play along. You become what they need, not because it's who you are, but because you're afraid. Afraid of disappointing, of being unloved, of being left behind. This is how manipulation operates, not in threats or loud demands, but in the quiet weight of guilt. And unless you learn to name it, to see it for what it is, you will continue to confuse emotional servitude with connection. When you feel that you owe something to others, that you must be available, must help, must understand, even when it chips away at your inner peace, you enter a trap. The trap isn't built with force or threats, it's built with guilt. And that's the core of manipulation. The manipulator doesn't need to dominate you. They only need you to keep reacting the same way. But when you stop reacting, when you shift the script, the entire game begins to fall apart. The moment you start saying no without explanation, the moment you choose silence instead of justification, withdrawal instead of self-defense, something profound happens. The projections they cast upon you begin to crumble. The identity they placed on you, the role they relied on you to play, no longer exists. And that unsettles people, because now they can no longer define you. Worse still, now they are confronted with themselves. And not everyone is ready for that reflection. Your unavailability becomes a mirror to their inner emptiness. The silence you offer doesn't comfort, it confronts. It exposes the noise within them that they've worked so hard to avoid. And when that happens, the response is rarely gratitude. Instead, you face criticism, emotional drama, accusations, not because you've done something wrong, but because you stopped being the mirror that made them feel whole without effort. Jung said we do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. When you step away, when you stop feeding dysfunctional dynamics, the shadow of the other begins to surface. And that shadow, their unhealed wounds, their fears, their insecurities, becomes unbearable for those who have long depended on you to keep their darkness at bay. But the real question is not about them, it's about you. Are you ready to face the discomfort of being misunderstood, misjudged, even rejected for choosing yourself? Are you prepared to sit with the silence that follows a rupture, a silence that can feel like exile, but in truth is rebirth? Because it is within that silence that a new kind of power is born, a power rooted not in domination, but in presence. And that's what we explore now. Why silence, real, conscious silence, can be the most devastatingly powerful force in human interaction. The modern world is loud. Everyone wants to be heard, to respond, to win arguments and prove their point, even if it costs them their own peace. But there is a power that moves in the opposite direction. A power few know, and even fewer dare to master. The power of silence. Not the silence of fear, not the silence of suppression, but the silence that comes from deep clarity, from brutal lucidity. The kind of silence that doesn't disappear, it intensifies presence. Carl Jung understood silence not as emptiness, but as a sacred space where transformation begins. Because when you stop reacting, you start observing. And with observation comes vision. You begin to see patterns you never noticed before. Emotional repetitions, manipulation loops, habits of self-abandonment. Silence brings these to light. And that light, that lucidity, is threatening to anyone who once relied on your blindness. Have you ever noticed how some people panic when you don't respond? When you don't explain yourself? When you simply go quiet? It's not always because they miss you. It's often because your silence steals their control. When you speak, you're still in the game. When you go quiet, you rewrite the rules. And that disturbs anyone who feeds on your reactivity. Because true silence isn't the absence of words. It is command over your own energy. It's a signal. I no longer play by your script. I choose me. Silence is not just the absence of noise. It is the refusal to be dragged down by someone else's emotions. It is the conscious decision not to waste yourself on battles that leave you emptier than before. Carl Jung spoke of individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, and it requires distance. It requires space. Because only in silence can you hear your own voice without the interference of the world's demands. But make no mistake, silence comes with a cost. It will push away those who only saw you as a role, not a person. It will confuse those who never truly knew you, only their idea of you. It will make you seem cold, distant, even arrogant. But that is simply the reaction of people who were never invested in your depth, only your utility. And here is the hard truth. The more you mature, the more selective you become with your words. You begin to understand that every sentence you speak is an energetic investment, and not everyone is worthy of your truth. Sometimes silence is not withdrawal. It is sovereignty. It is the quiet strength of someone who no longer needs to prove anything to anyone. Silence becomes uncomfortable because it forces others to sit with themselves. And that discomfort, that inner noise, reveals far more than any argument you could ever offer. You don't need to explain your absence. It speaks for itself. And those who feel disturbed by your silence often reveal just how much they relied on your imbalance to maintain their own sense of control. But the most transformative silence is not the one that shakes others. It is the one that rebuilds you. It is the silence that turns you inward, away from external validation, back toward your own center. In that sacred space, free from the noise of other people's expectations, you begin to gather yourself. You begin to remember who you were before the world told you who to be. That is where true energy comes from, not from pleasing or proving, but from presence, from essence. And that is what we must now explore, because it's not enough to cut out the noise. You must also learn to redirect your energy consciously, to decide with clarity where it flows, where it stays, and most importantly, where it must never be wasted again. You must become selective with your own soul. If you're in the process of reclaiming your energy and setting boundaries, my book Beyond the Shadow may offer you something meaningful. It breaks down Jung's most important insights and turns them into tools. Tools to protect your psychic energy, to draw clear emotional boundaries, and to reconnect with your true self. You'll find the link in the pinned comment. But remember this, insight alone changes nothing. Awareness without action is just another form of self-deception. Transformation begins the moment you stop negotiating your peace. It begins when you choose, again and again, to be disciplined with your energy, to say no without guilt, to remain silent without shame, to walk away without looking back. Because emotional discipline isn't about control over others. It's about liberation from the control they once had over you. Conscious unavailability is not about being cold, arrogant, or indifferent. It is about reclaiming control over your energy, time, and peace by choosing not to be accessible to anyone, at any time, for any reason. This process begins with small actions. Not responding immediately, taking a moment to breathe before reacting, stepping away from a conversation before it spirals into chaos, turning off your phone without feeling guilty, saying not today, saying I'm not interested, or saying I won't get involved. But perhaps the most important part is this. You don't need to justify your absence. You owe no explanations for your silence. You owe nothing to anyone but yourself, and for many, this is unforgivable. Refusing to explain yourself strips away the other person's power to keep you trapped in an emotional narrative where you are always expected to be the helpful, understanding, and accessible one. Carl Jung understood that the process of individuation often involves a period of isolation, but not the kind of isolation that leads to depression. It is a sacred isolation, a time of inner retreat where you rediscover the ability to listen to your own voice, free from the noise and influence of the world. It is a time to rebuild your identity, not based on how others perceive you, but from your own center. If you want to gauge your personal evolution, observe who begins to distance themselves from you when you become more reserved. Notice who tries to provoke you when you stop reacting. Pay attention to who accuses you of having changed when you finally begin to protect yourself. These are not signs that you are doing something wrong. They are proof that you are starting to free yourself. Being unavailable feels uncomfortable at first. You may feel guilty, think you are being selfish, or hear that you are being too harsh. But this discomfort is part of the process of deconstruction. You've spent much of your life conditioned to put others first, and it's natural for change to cause discomfort. Not just for you, but for those who benefited from the old version of you. Conscious unavailability is the foundation of self-determination. When you say no to the world, you are saying yes to yourself. When you withdraw from a toxic environment, you are affirming that your peace is worth more than any false connection. When you stop explaining yourself, you begin to earn respect, even if it comes from only a few. But not everyone is ready for this type of presence. Your emotional absence will expose wounds they may not want to face. It will reveal how much they relied on your emotional chaos to feel in control. And it is in this moment of revelation that the rupture occurs. With that rupture comes pain, loneliness, estrangement, the feeling that you are losing something, when in fact you are simply liberating yourself. So what happens after the distancing? What follows after the silence? What is born from it? In the final part, we will explore this, how rebirth happens only when you have the courage to be misunderstood, to be alone, and to become whole on your own. It is time to understand why the loneliness of the strong is the path to true freedom. When you stop being available to everyone, something profound begins to happen. First comes the silence, a silence that feels uncomfortable, almost like it's screaming inside you. You start to question whether you did the right thing, whether you're being too harsh, whether you're losing the people who liked you. But gradually, this silence transforms. It begins to cleanse, to calm, to heal. And then comes solitude, but not the solitude of absence. It is the solitude of total presence, your own presence, the solitude of the strong, the solitude of one who no longer betrays themselves in order to keep others close. And in that space where there was once confusion, clarity enters. Where there was once anxiety, peace enters. Where there was once neediness, a new kind of strength emerges, the strength of being whole within yourself. Carl Jung said that the process of individuation, becoming who you truly are, requires you to distance yourself from the collective, to disidentify from the mask, and to walk alone for a while. And that is exactly what you are doing when you decide to become unavailable. You are not fleeing the world. You are returning to yourself. It is at this point that you stop being a reactor and become a creator. You cease to be shaped by circumstances and begin to shape your reality from within. The people who feel uncomfortable with your absence reveal that they never truly wanted you. They wanted the role you played. And now that you no longer fit that role, they don't know what to do with you. And that is liberating. You will lose people, but you will find yourself. You will distance yourself from places, but you will reconnect with your essence. You will become misunderstood, but eventually you will begin to be respected. Because when you are no longer available for everything, you become valuable, rare, and unforgettable. And don't be fooled. This is a rebirth, a new beginning. It marks the start of a life where you are no longer available for emotional crumbs, for mind games, for voids disguised as affection. Now you only accept what resonates with your peace, with your truth, with your wholeness. If you have made it this far, it's because a part of you is already ready for this new path. A part of you already understands that being loved means nothing if, for that love, you must abandon yourself. True self-love begins when you choose yourself, even if it costs you the temporary pain of being alone. So now let me ask you, are you ready to be misunderstood, rejected, or even hated in the name of your inner freedom? Are you willing to pay the price of being true to yourself? If this message resonated with you, if it made sense, write in the comments, "I choose my peace." Let's see how many of you are ready for this transition. And don't forget, stay tuned for the next video. It's important more than you might think. See you there.